The sun hung like a copper coin over the white sands, bleeding heat into every grain of sand below. 108 degrees, the kind of heat that could kill a man in 4 hours or a woman in three. Tobias Graybear McAllister knew this desert the way a sailor knows the moods of the sea, and right now the desert was telling him something was wrong. 5 miles north, a column of black smoke rose straight as a rifle barrel into the windless sky. Not campfire smoke, not brush fire. This was sagebrush soaked in creek water, the old Apache signal, the kind you only sent when dying seemed certain and help seemed impossible. Tobias sat motionless on his roan mare, one hand shading his eyes, the other resting on the stock of his Springfield rifle. At 44 years old, he had the kind of stillness that only comes from watching too many men die. His hair, once brown, now carried more silver than a Montana creek. His beard hung thick and unkempt to his chest, the way mountain men wore them when they stopped caring what civilized folks thought. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from men who believed loyalty to the uniform mattered more than loyalty to the innocent. The mare shifted beneath him, sensing his hesitation. 5 years. 5 years he had kept himself out of the wars between red men and white. 5 years of hunting elk in the high country, trading furs in Tucson, avoiding the forts and the reservations in the endless, grinding machinery of what men called progress. 5 years of something close to peace. But smoke like that meant someone was dying. Tobias clicked his tongue. The mare turned north without argument. She had learned long ago that when her rider made a decision, there was no use fighting it. The desert stretched before them, white and merciless under the autumn sun. In the distance, the Superstition Mountains rose like broken teeth against the horizon. Somewhere in those mountains was his cabin, his books, his solitude. Somewhere up there was the life he had built from the ashes of the one he had burned down. But first there was smoke, and smoke meant fire. And fire in this country almost always meant blood. She hung like a broken bird against the wooden frame, her body twisted in a way that made mockery of the human form. The frame itself was perhaps 8 feet tall, 2 posts driven deep into the sand with a crossbeam lashed between them. Apache style. Tobias recognized the design immediately, the cruel genius of it. The sun frame, a torture device the Apache had used on enemies for generations, now turned against one of their own. The woman's hands were bound behind the vertical post with wet rawhide, the kind that would shrink and tighten as it dried, cutting deeper with each passing hour. Her left leg had been pulled up and back by a rope through a pulley at the top of the frame, stretching her body at an angle that would become agony after the first 10 minutes and unbearable after an hour. She had been here much longer than an hour. Tobias approached slowly, eyes scanning the sand for tracks, for ambush, for the trap this almost certainly was. 200 yards out, he could see she wore the traditional dress of the Mescalero Apache, buckskin decorated with the old symbols, though the dress was torn now, stained dark with sweat and blood. Her black hair hung loose, no longer bound in the careful way Apache women maintained it. Even from this distance, he could see her lips moving, repeating the same words again and again. 100 yards, the tracks told the story. 4 horses, all shod, all heavy riders, military or close enough. They had arrived yesterday morning, judging by how the sand had settled. They had left 6 hours ago, heading northwest toward Fort Apache. They had left her to die, but they had not expected anyone to find her this quickly. 50 yards. He could hear her now, the words coming in Apache, over and over, like a prayer or a curse. Bidi Aiden, don't look there. Don't look there. Tobias stopped his mare 20 yards out. The woman's head lifted slowly as if the weight of it was almost too much. Her eyes, dark and fierce even through the haze of pain, found him. She did not cry out. She did not beg. She simply looked at him, and in that look was something he recognized. Pride wounded deeper than any whip could cut. He slid from the saddle, leaving his rifle in its scabbard. If this was an ambush, shooting his way out would not matter. He walked forward slowly, hands visible, the way you approached a wounded animal that might bite from fear. Up close, the damage was worse than he had thought. The brand on her right thigh was fresh, maybe 2 days old, the skin blistered and weeping. The letter was clear even through the damage. Someone had taken a branding iron, heated it over a fire, and pressed it into her flesh the way you mark cattle. The burns extended 3 inches across, deep enough that she would carry that letter until the day she died. 15 lash marks across her back and shoulders, some shallow, some deep enough to have bled through the buckskin. 3 fingernails torn from her right hand, the fingertips swollen and dark with infection. Bruises covered her arms and ribs in patterns that spoke of fists and boots and systematic cruelty. But it was her face that made Tobias clench his jaw so hard his teeth ached. Dried blood crusted her split lip. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut. And yet she was still repeating those same words over and over, not to him, but to herself, a mantra against the shame of being seen this way. BD Aiden. Don't look there. Tobias stopped 3 feet from the frame. He looked at her face, only her face, and spoke in the Apache tongue, his accent rough but comprehensible after years of practice with men like old Jed. She nashdoi, Biden istwe, I am here to help, you are safe. The woman's eyes widened. Whatever she had expected, it was not a white man speaking her language, and speaking it with something close to respect. She stared at him, and in that stare, something shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or memory, or simply the desperate hope of the dying. Her voice came out as a whisper, switching to broken English. You, the one, saved Nichi. Tobias felt the words like a fist to his gut. He stood perfectly still, barely breathing. The scar on his face began to burn the way it did when the weather changed, or when the past came calling. You remember? His words came out rougher than he intended. You ran. Soldiers hunt you, Nichi said, gray bear with fire hair. The memory crashed over him like a wave. The smoke, the screaming, the tupelo burning with people inside. A boy, 16 years old, trapped under a fallen beam, his leg pinned, flames reaching for him. And Tobias running toward the fire instead of away from it, ignoring the orders shouted behind him, tearing at the burning wood with his bare hands until he could pull the boy free. And after, the sergeant major with the glowing knife from the cooking fire pressing it against Tobias's face while 3 men held him down. This is how we mark traitors to the white race. The smell of his own skin burning, the sound of his own screaming. He had saved one boy, one single but out of 144 dead. And this woman remembered. Is Nichi alive? The question came out before he could stop it. He lives because of you. Tobias reached for his knife, a Bowie blade 12 inches long that he had carried since the war. His hand shook slightly as he opened it. The woman tensed, pulling against her bonds despite the pain it must have caused. I am cutting the ropes, not you, never you. She watched him, eyes never leaving his face, as he stepped behind the frame and began sawing at the wet raw hide around her wrists. The rope was thick and the hide was strong. It took him 3 minutes to cut through it, 3 minutes during which neither of them spoke. When the rope parted, her arms fell forward. She cried out despite herself, the sound sharp and involuntary as blood rushed back into limbs that had been held immobile for hours. Tobias moved quickly to the pulley rope, lowering her raised leg as gently as he could. When both her feet touched the ground, she collapsed. He caught her before she hit the sand. She was lighter than he expected, her body burned down to muscle and bone by whatever ordeal had brought her here. He swung his bearskin coat from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, covering the torn dress, the brand, the wounds that no stranger should see. She fought him weakly, trying to pull the coat tighter around herself, her hands shaking with exhaustion and something deeper. Shame. The shame of being seen broken, of being seen helpless, of being seen as less than the warrior she had been raised to be. Bidai Aden, her voice was barely a whisper now. Don't look there. I did not look to shame you. I looked to heal you. There is a difference. She raised her eyes to his, and for the first time he saw tears threatening to spill over. But they did not fall. Apache women did not cry in front of strangers, even strangers who cut them down from torture frames. Why you help? You owe nothing. 5 years ago, I did not save enough people. Today, I will not let that happen again. Before she could respond, both of them heard it. The sound that had haunted too many of Tobias's nights. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the northwest. 3 horses, maybe 4, riding hard. The woman's face went pale beneath the dirt and dried blood. They come back to make sure I dead. Tobias looked toward the sound, then at the woman in his arms. She could not run. She could barely stand. Fighting was the only option, and fighting meant noise, and noise meant more soldiers would come. But sometimes a man did not get to choose his battles. Sometimes the battles chose him. Can you hold a gun? I can hold anything, if it kills them. The three riders appeared as dark shapes against the white sand, heat shimmer making them waver like ghosts. As they drew closer, Tobias recognized the lead man, Sergeant Jack Hendry. 50 yards out, he could see the gap where Hendry's right ear should have been, an Apache trophy from a fight 10 years gone. Hendry had been a civilian militiaman back then. Now he wore the uniform, such as it was, of men who drew pay from the Indian Affairs Office and asked no questions about what that pay required. The other two Tobias did not know. One was thin as a whip handle, eyes set too close together. The other was broad and heavy, riding slumped in the saddle the way drunks did. Both carried rifles across their pommels. Both had the look of men who had stopped caring about consequences long ago. The riders slowed as they approached, fanning out in a loose arc 30 feet away. Hendry's horse danced sideways, picking up the tension. The sergeant's hand rested on the butt of his pistol, but he had not drawn it. Not yet. Well, damn me twice and call me a liar. Gray Bear Tobias. Sergeant. Heard you was dead. Mexico way, I heard. Federales got you. Heard wrong. Hendry smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. His remaining ear had a notch cut in it, some other fight, some other scar. His face was a roadmap of violence survived. Funny thing, Tobias, Colonel Halloway, he told me just last week that you was dead certain. Said he had it on good authority. And here you are, large as life and twice as ugly. Colonel's information is bad then. Seems to be. Hendry's eyes shifted to the woman wrapped in Tobias's bearskin. Now that is interesting. That is real interesting. You know what that is you got there? A woman. Hurt bad. That there is Apache property. Colonel's got questions for her. Important questions about water and such. So what you are going to do, old man, is step aside and let us take her back to finish our conversation. Tobias felt the woman stiffen against him. Her hand, the one with torn fingernails, gripped his shirt. He could feel her trembling, though whether from pain or fear or rage he could not tell. No, the word hung in the air between them. Simple. Flat. Final. Hendry's smile faded. The thin man shifted his rifle. The drunk straightened slightly in his saddle, suddenly more alert. Old man, I am trying to be civilized here. Colonel wants that Apache. Colonel gets what he wants. You know how this works. Used to work that way. Not anymore. You gone simple? You are one man, we are three, and you are old. I can see it in how you stand. That right leg, you favor it. That shoulder, you hold it funny. You are past your fighting years, Tobias. Maybe. But today's a good day to find out. Hendry's hand moved toward his gun. But before he could draw, Tobias did something that surprised all of them, perhaps even himself. He pushed the woman gently to the ground behind him, keeping his body between her and the rifles. Then he took 2 steps forward, away from his own rifle still in the saddle scabbard, his hands loose at his sides. You want her? You go through me first. No guns, just fists, like men used to settle things. The drunk laughed, a sound like rocks in a can. The thin man spat into the sand. But Hendry studied Tobias with the careful attention of someone who had survived this long by knowing when the odds were not as simple as they seemed. You are serious, as the grave. For a moment no one moved. Then Hendry swung down from his saddle, handing his rifle to the thin man. He unbuckled his gun belt and hung it from his pommel. When he turned back to Tobias, his smile had returned, but now it carried anticipation. Your funeral, old man. They came together in the sand like 2 bulls meeting in a dry creek bed, sudden and brutal. Hendry threw the first punch, a straight right aimed at Tobias's jaw. Tobias slipped it, barely feeling the knuckles brush his beard. He countered with a left hook to Hendry's ribs, putting his weight behind it. The impact sent pain shooting up Tobias's arm. Hendry was wearing a leather vest, and the muscle beneath it was hardened by years of violence. But the sergeant groaned, so at least some damage had landed. Hendry stepped back, then came in low, driving his shoulder into Tobias's chest. They went down together, rolling in the sand. Hendry got on top, raining down punches. Tobias blocked what he could, took what he could not. A fist caught his cheek, splitting the skin. Another hit his mouth, filling it with blood. But age brings wisdom, and wisdom knows that young men waste energy on fury while old men conserve it for the killing stroke. Tobias waited, taking the punishment, until Hendry drew back for a heavy blow. In that moment, Tobias bucked his hips and twisted, throwing the sergeant sideways. Before Hendry could recover, Tobias drove his elbow down into the man's throat. Hendry made a choking sound and rolled away, gasping. Tobias pushed himself up, slower than he would have 10 years ago, his right knee protesting the movement. The old cavalry injury, the one that still ached when storms came in. Both men climbed to their feet. Hendry was rubbing his throat, his eyes watering but murderous. Tobias tasted copper in his mouth and spat blood into the sand. That was when the thin man got impatient. He raised his rifle, pointing it not at Tobias but at the woman still crouched behind him. Enough of this. Step away from the squaw or I drop her right here. Tobias froze. The thin man's finger was on the trigger, the muzzle steady. From this distance, even a poor shot could not miss. And from the cold look in the man's eyes, he would not hesitate. The drunk was laughing again, a sound like a bull cutting wood. What's it gonna be, old man? You gonna die for some Apache you do not even know? The woman spoke then, her voice carrying across the sand in English rough but understandable. If I die, others will know. Others will tell. Your colonel will answer. Hendry, still rubbing his throat, managed a rough laugh. Ain't nobody gonna believe a dead squaw, and ain't nobody gonna miss one neither. That was when the woman moved. Despite her injuries, despite her exhaustion, she had been working her hand across the sand while they talked. Now she lunged forward, grabbing at something. The thin man's pistol, which had slipped from Hendry's gun belt when he dismounted, half buried in the sand. Her fingers closed around it. She rolled onto her back, both hands on the weapon, though her torn fingernails made her gasp with pain. The pistol came up, shaking but aimed generally toward the three men. Leave. Now, or next bullet not miss. For a moment, no one moved. Then the drunk's laughter cut off like someone had closed a door. The thin man's rifle swung toward the woman. Hendry held up a hand. Wait. Everyone waited. The sun beat down. Sweat ran down faces. The hammer on the pistol was not cocked, Tobias noticed. The woman did not know how to use the weapon properly. If the thin man fired, she would die before she could cock and shoot. But Hendry was studying her face, then Tobias's face, then the situation as a whole. Finally, he shook his head. This ain't over, Tobias. Colonel's offering $300 for that Apache, $500 for your head. We will be back with 20 men. And when we come, there will not be talking. You come back, I will be ready. Hendry retrieved his gun belt, moving slowly, keeping his eyes on the pistol in the woman's hands. He mounted his horse, as did the other two. Before they turned to leave, he spat blood into the sand. You always was a fool for lost causes, Tobias, and this cause is as lost as they come. Then all three were riding away back toward Fort Apache, their horses kicking up sand that hung in the still air like smoke. When the riders disappeared over the horizon, the woman's arms began to shake. The pistol slipped from her fingers. Tobias moved quickly, catching her before she collapsed completely. This time she did not fight him, her body going slack in his arms. He carried her to his mare, speaking softly to the horse, who snorted but stood steady. He lifted the woman into the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her upright. She was burning with fever now, her skin hot through the bear-skin coat. They rode north toward the Superstition Mountains, toward his cabin and whatever safety he could offer. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling in Apache, sometimes in English, sometimes in some place between languages where pain lived. To you, she whispered. Sacred water, 7 springs. Grandfather showed me. Inde bik ego. Must protect. If white men find, my people die of thirst. Tobias did not understand all of it. His Apache was good enough for trading and basic conversation, but fever talk was another matter. But he caught the important words. Water, 7 springs, people die. In the Arizona desert, those 3 things together told a story even a fool could read. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of blood and gold. The cabin sat at the base of a cliff, hidden by ponderosa pines, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. One room, stone fireplace, a bed made from elk hides. It smelled of wood smoke and leather, and the long solitude of a man who had made peace with his ghosts, or at least learned to live alongside them. He carried the woman inside and laid her on his bed. Then he built up the fire, put water on to boil, and began the work he had done too many times in too many wars. The work of trying to undo what other men had done. The burn was infected. Of course it was. 2 days in the desert sun with an open wound, it could hardly be otherwise. He cleaned it with boiled water and the last of his whiskey, which made the woman wake briefly, her body going rigid with pain before unconsciousness took her again. The lash marks were shallower but more numerous. He counted them. 15. 15 times someone had raised a whip and brought it down across her back. 15 times someone had decided her pain mattered less than his questions. The fingernails would need careful tending. 3 of them torn away, the quick exposed and angry red. He had seen this before in the war. It was an interrogator's technique, easy to do, hard to endure, and it left the victim alive to talk, at least for a while. What kind of man does this? The question was not for her, but for the empty cabin, for the fire, for whatever God might be listening. But he knew the answer. He had known men like this, had served alongside some of them, had, if he was honest, been one of them, once upon a time before he learned that following orders was not the same as doing right. He worked through the night, cleaning wounds, applying poultices made from yarrow, an osha root that old Jed had taught him to gather. The woman woke several times, always starting awake as if from nightmare, always taking a moment to remember where she was. Once, near dawn, she spoke clearly in English. "Why you help me, you owe me nothing." Tobias was stirring a pot of bone broth, his back to her. He did not turn around. 5 years ago, I did not save enough people. 143 died at Camp Grant. I saved one boy. Just one. Today I will not make the same mistake. You were there? At the burning? I was there. I led the soldiers to the village. I did not know what they would do, but ignorance is not innocence. When I saw the fires, I ran. Found your brother trapped inside a tuplu, pulled him out, and after they marked me for it. He touched the scar on his face without thinking. The woman was quiet for a long time. Then, "Nichi is my brother. He spoke of you. Gray Bear who ran into fire. He said you lost everything to save him. He lives now because of you. Not enough. Should have saved more. One life is worth saving. My brother's life was worth saving." Tobias finally turned to face her. In the firelight, despite the bruises and the swelling, he could see she was younger than he had first thought. Perhaps 29 or 30, though suffering had aged her beyond her years. Her eyes were dark and clear, and held an intelligence that suffering had not managed to touch. "What is your name?" "Aizeanzai." It means, "she who keeps the oath." "And what oath do you keep?" She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I am keeper of sacred springs, 7 springs that give water to my people. Without water, we die. The colonel, he knows this. He wants me to tell where springs are, so he can take them, control them. Make us leave or die of thirst." The pieces fell into place. The torture, the brand marked with an H, for Halloway, the Indian agent who ran San Carlos Reservation with an iron fist and a crooked ledger. The desperate questions about water. How many people depend on these springs? 300, maybe more. Old people, children, warriors, all drink from 7 springs. "And only you know where they are?" "Only 3 knew. My grandfather, he is dead. My mother, she is dead. Now only me, mine." Tobias ladled broth into a cup and brought it to her. She took it with both hands, wincing as the movement pulled at her injuries. But she drank. When she finished, she looked up at him with those clear, dark eyes. "You will help me protect the springs?" "Yes. Why? You are white man. My people have killed white men. White men have killed my people. Why you choose my side?" Tobias sat down on the floor near the fireplace, his old joints creaking. He was quiet for a long time, watching the flames dance. Because I have spent 5 years trying to sleep through the night without seeing the faces of 143 dead people. If I save 300 now, perhaps the dreams will ease. Perhaps not. But either way, I will not walk past a woman dying in the desert just because helping her is complicated. Isinzai studied him with the intensity of someone who had learned to read truth in the faces of liars. Finally, she nodded. Then I will trust you, Gray Bear. But know this, if you betray me, my brother Nichi will hunt you to the end of the earth. He is alive because you saved him. But he will kill you if you hurt me. Fair enough. They sat in silence then, the fire crackling, the night deepening outside. Neither of them knew that in 3 days Nichi would walk through that door with a bow drawn and rage in his eyes. Neither knew that the simple act of cutting a woman down from a torture frame would draw them into a war that would reach all the way to Washington. Neither knew that sometimes saving one person meant standing against everyone else. But they would learn. The desert was a good teacher, and it was patient. 3 nights after Tobias cut Isianzai down from the frame, the wolves spoke. Or what sounded like wolves to anyone who had not spent years learning the old Apache ways. 2 long howls, then 3 short ones, then silence. It was not the pattern of any wolf that ran these mountains. Tobias was sitting by the window, cleaning his rifle by lamplight while Isianzai slept. Her fever had broken the day before, and color was returning to her face, though she still moved with the careful slowness of someone learning to trust her body again. When the howls came, his hand stilled on the rifle barrel. Isianzai sat up in bed, awake instantly the way soldiers and warriors did. Her eyes found his in the lamplight. Nichi, he found me. Tobias set the rifle aside and stood, moving to the door. His hand rested on the latch but did not open it. Outside, the moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to see by, bright enough to shoot by. If this was an ambush, opening the door was suicide. If it was truly Nichi, not opening it was an insult that might turn friendship into blood feud. He chose the insult. Nichi, she a Tobias, niwe, ananiu nihi. The words came out in Apache, rough but clear. I am Tobias, you remember me. For 10 heartbeats, nothing. Then a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the pines. A man stepped into the moonlight, bow drawn, arrow nocked and aimed at the cabin door. Even in the dim light, Tobias could see the warrior's stance, the controlled fury in every line of his body. The voice that came back was young and hard as flint. Gray Bear, you alive? It was not a question, not quite an accusation, something in between. I am alive. Your sister is inside. She is healing. Where is she? The bow did not lower. Tobias turned to Isianzai. She had risen from the bed, wrapped in his bearskin, moving carefully to the door. She spoke through the wood in rapid Apache, words that Tobias only partly understood, but he caught the important parts. Safe. Help me. Trust him. The bow lowered, but did not unstring. A moment later, the door swung open and Nichi stepped inside. 2 more shadows moved in the darkness behind him. Warriors who stayed in the trees but were there, watching, ready. In the lamplight, Nichi was younger than Tobias remembered. 21 years old now, but already carrying the look of a man who had seen more death than years. He was tall for an Apache, nearly 5 feet 10, with the lean build of a long-distance runner. His face was harder than it had been 5 years ago. The softness of youth burned away by whatever had happened since Tobias pulled him from the flames at Camp Grant. The scar on Nichi's left arm was new. So was the wariness in his eyes. The young warrior looked at Tobias for a long moment, and Tobias saw the recognition happen. The memory of pain and smoke, and a white man's hands pulling him toward air and life. Then Nichi's eyes shifted to his sister. What happened? Isianzai told him. All of it. The soldiers coming in the morning. Hendry and his men dragging her from the creek where she had been gathering medicine plants. The questions about the springs, the burning iron, the whip, the pliers tearing at her fingernails while Hendry asked again and again, where is the water? Where do your people drink? Tell us, and this stops. She told him how they left her on the frame to die in the sun, how Tobias found her, how he fought Hendry and the others with fists because gunshots would bring more soldiers, how he brought her here and tended her wounds with medicines that were half white man's and half Apache. When she finished, Nichi's hands were shaking. He turned to Tobias, and for a moment his hand moved toward the knife at his belt. Then it stopped. "Why you not protect her? You let this happen. I did not know. I found her in the desert. I brought her home. You white man. White men did this. Why I trust you?" Isianzai's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Nichi, stop. He saved me, like he saved you." The young warrior's face twisted with emotions that had no easy names. Rage at what had been done. Shame that he had not been there to prevent it. Confusion about this white man who kept appearing at the worst moments of their lives like some strange guardian spirit who belonged to neither world. Finally, Nichi crossed to his sister and knelt beside her. When he saw the brand on her thigh, barely visible beneath the bandages Tobias had applied, his breath caught. When he saw her swollen fingertips, tears began to run down his face, though he made no sound. "I was hunting, in the high country, 4 days away. I did not know they took you. Not your fault. They came with 20 men. You cannot fight 20. I should have died trying. No." She gripped his hand with her good fingers. "You live, that is more important, because now we fight together." Nichi looked up at Tobias then, really looked at him, past the scar and the gray hair and the rough clothes of a mountain hermit. What he saw there seemed to satisfy something. The two warriors outside. "Bring them in." Nichi stood and called out in Apache. 2 men emerged from the darkness and entered the cabin. The first was perhaps 35, powerfully built, with 3 parallel scars across his face that looked like claw marks. His name was Goyakla, and his eyes held the kind of suspicion that came from seeing too many white men break too many promises. The second was younger and leaner, with the watchful eyes of a scout. Kaita. He said nothing, but his gaze moved around the cabin, cataloging everything. The rifle, the knife, the medicines on the shelf, the way Tobias positioned himself between the door and Aishanzai. Goyakla spoke first, his English harsh and clipped. "Why we trust white man? All white men lie." Tobias met his eyes steadily. 5 years ago, I saved Nichi from fire. Today, I saved Isianzai from sunframe. I do not ask you to trust me. I ask you to see what I have done, because you feel guilty, not because you care. The truth of it hit harder than any fist. Tobias nodded slowly. "Yes, I feel guilty. 143 people died at Camp Grant. I led soldiers there. I did not know what they would do, but I led them. That guilt lives in me like a coal that never goes cold. But that guilt makes me do right now. That is better than the men who feel no guilt at all." Keita spoke then, his voice quieter but no less intense. He fought for her. Blood on his face is not only his. They all turned to look. Tobias's face was indeed marked from the fight with Hendry. Split lip, bruised cheek, the kind of damage that came from putting your body between violence and someone who could not defend themselves. Nichi made a decision. He looked at his sister, then at Tobias, then at the two warriors. "We take Isianzai back to hidden camp, in the mountains. Safe there." Isianzai shook her head. "No, Halloway will find camp. He has trackers, he will attack. Kill everyone to make us talk about springs. Then we fight. With what? 15 warriors against 50 soldiers with rifles? We die." Tobias spoke into the heavy silence that followed. "There is another way." They all turned to him. He met their eyes, each in turn, then spoke carefully, knowing he was proposing something that cut against everything their pride wanted. "We gather proof of what Halloway did. Photographs, witnesses, legal documents. We take them to Fort Apache, to Captain Garrett. He is honest. One of the few. He has been trying to investigate Halloway for months. He needs evidence." Nichi spat on the floor. "White man law not help Apache, never help. Captain Garrett is different. 3 years ago, he refused orders to attack women and children. His superior officer wanted him court-martialed. Garrett was punished, but he did not back down. I know this because I was there. How we get proof?" Goyakla's voice was skeptical but interested. Tobias laid out the plan. First, photograph Isianzai's injuries. Old Jed Cooper had a wet plate camera, one of the few in this territory. Second, find other Apache who had been harmed by Halloway. Get their testimony. Third, steal Halloway's ledgers from his warehouse. The ones that showed him selling Apache food rations to white merchants while reporting full distribution to the government. Fourth, and most dangerous, they needed someone from inside Halloway's organization to turn witness. Someone who had participated but now regretted it. Someone whose conscience had finally caught up with their actions. This is white man way. Keita's voice carried doubt. Not warrior way. Isianzai spoke then, her voice weak but firm. If we fight, children die, old people die. I do not want that. My wounds heal. But if we start war, wounds never heal. The argument continued for another hour. Goyakla wanted blood. Nichi wanted justice but did not trust white courts. Keita said little but watched everything. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they reached agreement. Tobias and Isianzai would ride to old Jed's place, get the photographs. Nichi and the others would ride through the scattered Apache camps, finding witnesses, building a case that even white judges could not ignore. They would meet back here in 3 days. As the warriors prepared to leave, Nichi came to stand before Tobias. The young man was nearly as tall as the mountain man now, no longer the boy pulled from flames. If she dies because you make wrong choice, I hunt you forever. Tobias nodded. If she dies, you will not need to hunt me. I will hunt myself. The ride to Jed Cooper's cabin took most of the day. Tobias kept to game trails and dry washes, avoiding the main roads where Halloway's men might patrol. Isianzai rode behind him, still too weak to ride alone, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from falling. They spoke little. She drifted in and out of an exhausted half-sleep, her head resting against his back. Once she woke suddenly, crying out in Apache, reliving the torture in dreams. Tobias stopped the mare and waited until her breathing steadied. You are safe, he said it in English first, then in Apache. I know, but my body does not know yet. It will learn. Give it time. The sun was low when they finally reached the canyon where Jed made his home. The old trapper's cabin sat tucked against a red rock cliff, nearly invisible until you were right on top of it. Smoke rose from the chimney, and 3 horses stood in the corral, which meant Jed had company or had been trading recently. Tobias whistled as they approached, the pattern he and Jed had agreed on years ago. 2 short, 1 long, 2 short. A moment later, the cabin door opened and Jed Cooper stepped out, squinting into the late afternoon sun. At 72, Jed was bent but not broken, his white hair wild around a face that looked like weathered wood. He carried a rifle but lowered it when he saw Tobias. Then his eyes found Isianzai, and his expression changed. Boy, what trouble have you brought to my door this time? The kind that cannot be walked away from. Jed studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. Come in then. I will put coffee on. Looks like we got a long night ahead. Inside, the cabin smelled of tobacco and coffee and leather. Jed had been working on trap repairs, steel jaws and springs spread across his table. He swept them aside and began building up the fire while Tobias helped Isianzai to a chair. The old man moved with the careful economy of someone who knew exactly how many years he had left and refused to waste them on unnecessary motion. He ground coffee beans, put water to boil, and pulled out a loaf of hard bread and some dried venison. Only when all 3 of them had food and drink did he finally speak. All right, tell me. Tobias told him everything, the torture frame, Hendry and his men, the sacred springs and Halloway's plan to control the water supply, the need for evidence, for photographs, for something that would force the corrupt machinery of the Indian Affairs Office to actually notice one woman's suffering. Jed listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Isianzai, who sat silent, her bandaged hands wrapped around her coffee cup. When Tobias finished, the old trapper was quiet for a long time. You know who her people are? He asked finally. Apache. Mescalero, I think. Jed shook his head. More specific than that, boy. She is Chief Nana's daughter-in-law. Her husband was Chato, finest warrior I ever traded with. Fair man, honest, died 3 winters back from the white cough. Isianzai looked up sharply. You knew Chato? Jed nodded. Traded furs with him for 5 years. He spoke of you, said you were keeper of the old ways, said you remembered things other people forgot. He spoke of you too, called you old white wolf with honest heart. Something in Jed's face softened. That man saved my life once. Warm spring of 73, I got pinned under a dead horse in a wash. Flash flood coming. Chato pulled me out, never asked for nothing in return. Just did it because it was the right thing. He looked at Tobias. Like some other people I know. The old man stood and moved to a trunk in the corner. He pulled out a large wooden box, handling it carefully. Inside was the wet plate camera, a massive thing of wood and brass and glass that weighed nearly 40 pounds. Bought this off a traveling photographer 2 years back. Thought I would take pictures of mountains. Turns out mountains do not sit still long enough for the exposure time. He set the camera on the table. But this sits still enough. He looked at Isian's eye. Child, what they did to you, it is a mark of their sin, not yours. And if we can make that mark speak, if we can make it testify in a white court the way white judges understand, then maybe, just maybe, we can stop them from doing it to anyone else. Isianzai set down her coffee cup. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. What you need me to do? Setting up the camera took an hour. Jed positioned it near the window where the morning light would be strongest. He explained the process to them in his patient way. The glass plate coated with collodion solution, the exposure time of 30 seconds, the development in silver nitrate. The whole process was complex and unforgiving, one of the reasons photographs were still rare in this territory. We do it at first light, Jed said. Best light then. And besides, child needs rest. That night, Isianzai slept while Tobias and Jed sat by the fire, speaking in low voices. The old man wanted to know everything about the last 5 years, where Tobias had been, what he had seen, how he had survived the solitude. Tobias told him some of it. The hunting, the long winters alone, the slow process of learning to live with ghosts instead of trying to outrun them. But some things he kept to himself. Some things had no words. You know this is going to bring you back into the world, Jed said eventually. You help this woman, you cannot go back to your mountain and pretend it never happened. Halloway will come for you. I know. And you are doing it anyway. I am doing it anyway. Jed smiled, his few remaining teeth showing in the firelight. That is the Tobias I remember. The one who jumped into a burning building because there was a child inside. The one who got his face carved up because he would not let soldiers shoot an unarmed boy. That Tobias got a lot of people killed at Camp Grant. That Tobias led soldiers there not knowing what they planned. That Tobias tried to stop it when he saw what was happening. That Tobias has been punishing himself ever since for sins that were not his to carry. The old man leaned forward, his eyes sharp despite his age. You cannot save everyone, boy. No man can. But that does not mean you stop trying to save anyone. You understand the difference? Tobias was quiet for a long time. Through the window, he could see stars scattered across the desert sky like spilled salt. Somewhere out there, Halloway was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, 300 Apache were drinking from springs they did not know were marked for theft. I understand. Good. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a hard day for all of us. Morning came cold and clear. Jed had Isianzai stand by the window, where the pale light fell across her face and body. Tobias stood behind the camera, where she could see him, where his presence might make the unbearable slightly more bearable. Child, Jed said gently, I need you to lift your dress. Show the brand. Isianzai stood frozen, her hands gripping the fabric. Every muscle in her body was tense with the effort of not running, not hiding, not protecting what little privacy she had left. I cannot. The words came out broken. It is shame, but no, child. Shame is on the man who did this. What you are showing is proof. Proof that you survived. Proof that you are strong enough to let the world see what he did and still stand tall. Tobias spoke then, his voice quiet but carrying across the small room. Nijoni, Nijoni Aniuni. The Apache words hung in the air. You are strong, you are warrior. Isianzai looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her face changed. She took a breath, deep and steady, then pulled the dress up to her waist. The brand was still angry and red, the letter H burned into her thigh 3 inches across. Around it, bruises had faded from purple to yellow-green. The wounds from the rope that had held her leg looked like burns themselves, raw and weeping. Jed worked quickly, coating the glass plate, sliding it into the camera, removing the lens cap. 30 seconds. In that half minute, Isian's eye stood perfectly still, tears running down her face but her back straight, her chin lifted, not begging, not cowering, testifying. When Jed replaced the lens cap, she lowered the dress and her legs gave out. Tobias caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her carefully to a chair. She did not sob. She did not wail. She simply sat there, trembling while the two men gave her the grace of silence. After a few minutes she spoke, her voice rough but clear. I am not brave, I am terrified, but I choose to show truth. Tobias knelt beside her chair. That is what brave means, doing what must be done even when you are afraid. Jed developed the plate in his makeshift darkroom, a corner of the cabin covered with blankets to block the light. When he emerged, he held the glass negative up to the window. The image was clear and sharp. A woman standing in morning light, her wounds visible, her dignity intact. This will speak louder than words, Jed said. White judges believe their eyes more than they believe testimony from Indians or mountain men. This they cannot ignore. The old man looked at both of them, his expression serious. You know what you are starting here? Once this photograph reaches Fort Apache, once it gets sent to Washington, there is no taking it back. Halloway will come with everything he has. Tobias met his eyes, then let him come. They stayed at Jed's cabin through the day, letting ICN's eye rest while Jed made prints of the photograph. By evening, they had 3 copies, each one a damning piece of evidence, wrapped in cloth and ready to travel. That was when Nichi returned. The young warrior came alone this time, moving through the twilight like a shadow, but his face told the story before his words did. Something had gone wrong. What happened? Tobias asked as soon as Nichi entered. The warrior paced the small cabin like a caged mountain lion. We found witnesses, 3 women, 2 old men, all hurt by Halloway's men, all willing to speak. We were bringing them to meeting place when soldiers came. 20 soldiers. They knew where we would be. An ambush? Nichi shook his head. Not ambush. They were waiting. They knew our path, knew our timing. Someone told them. Tobias felt something cold settle into his stomach. Who knew your plans? Only people in this cabin and Goyakla and Kayeta and the witnesses. Nichi stopped, pacing, his face hard. Unless one of your white men talk. Jed bristled. I have not left this cabin since you arrived. Tobias thought hard, running through the possibilities. Then another thought occurred. When you found the witnesses, did you tell anyone else? Anyone in the camps? Nichi hesitated. We told headman at each camp. They needed to know why we take their people. And we saw one soldier, young officer. He was at trading post where we got supplies. He saw us with the witnesses. What did this officer look like? Tall, yellow hair, blue uniform, new. Young, maybe 30 winters. Tobias exchanged a glance with Jed. The old man's face had gone grim. Lieutenant Henry Ford, you know him? Tobias nodded slowly. He was scout 3 years back. Good man then. But I heard he got into gambling debts, heavy ones. And men with debts can be bought, Jed finished. Halloway probably owns him now. ICN's eye spoke from her chair by the fire. Then what we do, plan is broken. Not broken, changed. Tobias was thinking fast now. If Ford is reporting to Halloway, then Halloway knows we are gathering evidence. He will move fast to stop us, which means we need to move faster. How? Nichi's frustration was clear. Witnesses are scattered, some afraid now. Soldiers are hunting us. Then we do not wait for witnesses to come to us. We go to Fort Apache now, tonight, with what we have. The photograph, my testimony, Isianzai's testimony. It is enough to start an official investigation. Jed shook his head. Boy, you are talking about riding into a fort that is full of Halloway's men, with the one woman he wants dead and the one mountain man he has put a price on. That is not a plan. That is suicide. Maybe. But Captain Garrett is there too, and if we can reach him before Halloway knows we are coming, he can protect us long enough to send the evidence to Washington. And if Halloway does know you are coming, Tobias checked his rifle, then his pistol, methodically going through the motions he had learned in too many wars. Then we fight our way to Garrett anyway. Nichi stepped forward, and for the first time since entering, something like respect showed in his face. I ride with you. You sure? This is white man fort, white man politics. Not your fight. He looked at his sister, then back at Tobias. She is my blood. Anyone who hurt her, that is my fight. Jed sighed and reached for his own rifle, an old Sharps that he kept oiled and ready despite his age. Well, if you young fools are going to get yourselves killed, somebody has got to be there to tell the story properly. You do not have to come, Tobias said. The old man snorted. I am 72, lived longer than I had any right to. And Chato saved my life once. I owe that man's widow my presence in her hour of need. Besides, he grinned, fierce and sudden, I always wanted to see if I could hit a target at 300 yards in moonlight. They prepared to ride. Tobias helped Isianzai into her saddle, his hands steadying her when she swayed. She was still weak, still healing, but her eyes were clear and her jaw was set. You ready for this? He asked quietly. No, but I go anyway. That is becoming our way, it seems. They left Jed's cabin as the moon rose, 4 riders heading north toward Fort Apache and whatever waited there. The desert stretched before them, silver and black under the stars. Somewhere ahead, Colonel Marcus Halloway was planning murder. Somewhere ahead, Captain James Garrett was probably sleeping, unaware that by morning his choice would be simple: stand with justice or stand aside. And somewhere behind them, Lieutenant Henry Ford was reporting to Halloway that the mountain man and the Apache woman were on the move. The betrayal was already in motion. The pieces were moving toward collision. And in the cold mathematics of violence, the only question left was who would survive to tell the story. They rode through the night, pushing the horses hard, but not to breaking. Twice they stopped to rest and water the animals. Once they heard riders in the distance and hid in a dry wash until the sounds faded. Isianzai held up better than Tobias expected, though he could see the pain in every line of her body. Dawn was still 2 hours away when they reached the low hills that surrounded Fort Apache. Tobias called a halt and dismounted, studying the terrain. The fort sat in a valley, visible even in the darkness by the lights burning in the guard posts. Too quiet, Nichi said softly. Where are patrols? Jed grunted agreement. He is right. Fort always has perimeter patrols. I do not see any. Tobias felt the trap closing like a fist. They know we are coming. Then we already too late. Nichi's hand moved to his bow. Maybe. Or maybe we can use their trap against them. How? Tobias outlined a new plan quickly. They would split up. Nichi would circle east with Isianzai, approaching from the direction Halloway would not expect. Tobias and Jed would ride straight in from the south, drawing attention. When the shooting started, and it would start, Nichi would get Isianzai to Captain Garrett's quarters, which stood separate from the main buildings. It was not a good plan, but it was the only plan they had. They were about to separate when they heard it. Hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, coming fast from the south. Tobias swore, they are behind us. And in front, Nichi pointed toward the fort, lights moving, men mounting horses, preparing to ride out. We are surrounded, not surrounded. Jed's voice was calm, almost cheerful. Cornered. There is a difference. Surrounded means they are everywhere. Cornered means they are only where we can see them. The old man pointed west, where the hills rose higher. That way, rough terrain, horses slow down. But we know these rocks. Halloway's men, they do not. They rode. Behind them, the pursuers were closing fast, 30 men or more from the sound of it. Ahead, another 10 were coming out from the fort. The trap was springing, steel jaws closing on 4 people who had committed the crime of caring about justice. They reached the rocks and dismounted, leading the horses through narrow passages where mounted men could not easily follow. Tobias heard shouting behind them, orders being called. Then gunfire, shots aimed high, warning shots designed to make them stop and surrender. Jed found what he was looking for, a natural fortress of stone, high ground with good sight lines and only 2 approaches. They will have to come at us uphill in the open. Old man smiled. This is defensible. Nichi strung his bow and knocked an arrow. How long we can hold? Until morning, maybe longer if we are lucky. And then? Tobias checked his rifle one more time. Then we see if Captain Garrett is the man I think he is. Or if we die here trying to prove that justice sometimes matters more than orders. Isianzai touched his arm. Thank you for everything. If we die, I want you to know that. We are not dying today. Tobias said it with more confidence than he felt. Today we win, or we make them pay so dearly for victory that it feels like defeat. The first riders reached the base of the rocks. A voice called out, amplified by a speaking trumpet. Tobias McAllister, by order of Colonel Marcus Halloway, you are under arrest for kidnapping and harboring a fugitive Apache. Tobias cupped his hands and shouted back. By order of common decency, Colonel Halloway can go to hell. There was a moment of silence. Then Lieutenant Henry Ford's voice, younger and less certain. Tobias, do not make this harder than it has to be. Surrender the woman and you can live. Cannot do that, Lieutenant. Sorry about your debts, but some things matter more than money. The shooting started in earnest then. Bullets whined off the rocks. Jed fired his sharps, the boom of it echoing through the stones. Someone down below screamed. One shot, one kill. The old man still had it. Nichi's bow sang. An arrow found the throat of a soldier trying to climb the east approach. The man fell backward, taking 2 others with him. Tobias fired carefully, making each shot count. They had ammunition, but not enough for a long siege. Every bullet had to matter. He hit a soldier in the leg, then another in the shoulder, wounding but not killing. Wounded men required care, and care took men out of the fight. The battle settled into an ugly rhythm. Attack, repulse, reload, wait. The sun began to rise, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. Beautiful and terrible, like most things in this country. Then everything changed. A new sound joined the battle. A bugle, clear and bright. The cavalry call for ceasefire. The shooting from below stopped. Men looked around, confused. Tobias risked a look over the rocks. Riding up from the fort came a new force. 20 soldiers in fresh uniforms, riding in formation, led by an officer on a gray horse. Even from this distance, Tobias recognized him. Captain James Garrett, straight-backed and proper as always. Garrett rode to where Halloway's men had gathered and dismounted. His voice carried in the morning air, pitched for command. By what authority do you fire on American citizens? Lieutenant Ford stepped forward, uncertain. Colonel Halloway's authority, sir. Colonel Halloway is under arrest. The words fell like stones into still water. Everyone froze. Ford's face went white. Halloway's men looked at each other, suddenly unsure. Garrett continued, his voice hard as iron. I received a telegram from Washington 3 days ago. When they reached level ground, Garrett walked forward to meet them. His eyes took in Isianzai's condition. The bandages, the way she moved carefully like everything still hurt. Miss, are you Isianzai, keeper of the sacred springs? She nodded, too surprised to speak. I apologize for what has been done to you in the name of the United States government. It was unconscionable, and it will be answered for. Then Garrett looked at Tobias, and something like a smile crossed his stern face. McAllister. Still finding trouble, I see. Trouble finds me, Captain. I just try to do right by it. Well, you have certainly done that this time. He gestured to his men. Escort these people to my quarters. Full guard. No one gets in or out without my authorization. As they walked toward the fort, Isianzai leaned close to Tobias and whispered, We won. Not yet, but maybe we did not lose. Sometimes that is enough. Behind them, Lieutenant Ford stood alone among Halloway's scattered men, knowing that the debts he owed had just become far more expensive than money could ever pay. And somewhere in the fort, Colonel Marcus Halloway was learning that torture leaves scars not just on the body, but on the soul of everyone who witnesses it. And sometimes, just sometimes, those witnesses find their voices. The reckoning was coming. But for now, for this moment, 4 tired people walked towards something that looked almost like safety. It would have to be enough. Captain James Garrett's quarters were sparse in the way of career soldiers who had learned not to accumulate possessions. A desk, a bed, a trunk, a bookshelf with military manuals and a worn Bible. Maps covered one wall, showing the Arizona territory in careful detail. Through the window, the parade ground was visible, already filling with soldiers as word spread that something unprecedented was happening. Tobias stood by that window watching. Isianzai sat in the room's only chair, exhausted beyond words. Nichi and Jed positioned themselves by the door, neither quite willing to believe they were safe inside a military fort. Old Jed kept his Sharps rifle across his knees, and Nichi had not unstrung his bow. Garrett entered carrying a tray with coffee, bread, and dried beef. He set it on the desk and poured cups for everyone before speaking. You should eat. The hearing will not begin for several hours. Congressional Representative Dawson is writing from Tucson. He will be here by noon. Tobias turned from the window. Dawson? William Dawson? The same. He has been investigating irregularities in the Indian Affairs Office for the past year. Your timing, McAllister, is either remarkably lucky or remarkably well-planned. Lucky. We did not know Dawson was involved. Garrett nodded and sat behind his desk. Then let me explain what will happen. This is not a trial, not yet. It is a hearing. Dawson will take testimony from anyone with knowledge of Colonel Halloway's actions. That testimony will be recorded and sent to Washington. Based on what he hears, Dawson will recommend whether formal charges should be filed. And Halloway? Where is he now? In the stockade. Under guard. He has been there since I received the telegram 3 days ago. He believes he is being held on minor administrative charges. He does not know about you, or about the photograph, or about any of this. Garrett's eyes moved to Isianzai. Miss, I need to be clear with you. What will be asked of you today will not be easy. You will have to speak in front of soldiers, in front of Colonel Halloway himself, and describe what was done to you. Some of those soldiers are Halloway's men. Some may not believe you. Can you do that? Isianzai met his gaze steadily. I stood on torture frame for 2 days. I can stand in front of white men and speak truth. Good. Garrett stood and moved to a cabinet, removing a wooden box. Inside was a glass plate negative. Your friend Mr. Cooper was kind enough to send me this yesterday by courier, along with a letter explaining its provenance and chain of custody. It has been stored securely since then. Jed grunted. Sent my nephew. Fast rider. Figured you might need it before they arrived. Wise. Very wise. Garrett returned the negative to its box. This photograph is the most powerful evidence we have. But evidence alone is not enough. We need context. We need testimony. We need to build a case so overwhelming that even Halloway's political allies in Washington cannot ignore it. He looked at each of them in turn. That means all of you will testify. Tobias, you will describe finding Miss Isianzai and fighting Halloway's men. Jed, you will describe taking the photograph and your knowledge of Halloway's trading practices. Nichi, you will speak about the conditions on the reservation and your sister's role as keeper of the sacred springs. And Isianzai will tell her story, all of it, from beginning to end. The room was quiet for a moment, then Tobias spoke. What about Lieutenant Ford? Will he testify? Garrett's expression hardened. Ford came to me last night, confessed everything, the gambling debts, Halloway paying them in exchange for information, Ford reporting your movements, your plans, your companions. He is in the stockade as well, but separate from Halloway. He has agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He betrayed us, and now he bargains? Nichi's voice was sharp with anger. Yes, and we will accept his bargain because his testimony corroborates everything else. Justice is not always satisfying, young man. Sometimes it is simply necessary. There was a knock at the door. A sergeant entered and saluted. Sir, Congressman Dawson has arrived. He is ready to begin. Garrett stood, buttoning his uniform jacket. Then let us not keep him waiting. He looked at the 4 people in his quarters. This strange alliance of mountain man, Apache woman, Apache warrior, and aging trapper. Whatever happens in the next few hours will determine the course of many lives. Speak truth. That is all any of us can do. They followed him out into the bright morning sun. The parade ground had been transformed. A table and chairs had been set up at one end, with rows of benches facing them. Soldiers lined the perimeter, some there for security, others simply curious about the spectacle. Beyond the fort walls, word had spread to the nearby town. Civilians had gathered at the gates, pressing close to see what would happen. Congressman William Dawson sat at the center table, flanked by 2 territorial judges who had ridden in with him. Dawson was 56, with iron gray hair and the weathered face of a man who had spent years fighting political battles. He looked tired but determined. Captain Garrett sat to one side with a military stenographer who would record every word. On the other side sat Reverend Thomas Whitmore, the old missionary who had sent the original telegram to Washington. At 68, Whitmore moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp and his presence lent moral weight to the proceedings. Colonel Marcus Halloway was led out in chains. He was 53, thick around the middle, with thinning hair and the florid complexion of a man who drank too much. But his eyes were what struck Tobias. They were not the eyes of a monster. They were the eyes of a man who had suffered and let that suffering poison everything he touched. Halloway saw Isianzai, and his face went rigid with shock. Then he saw Tobias, and recognition followed by calculation flashed across his features. Finally, he saw the photograph, displayed on an easel near Dawson's table, and something in him seemed to collapse inward. Dawson stood and the crowd quieted. This hearing will come to order. We are here to investigate allegations of torture, embezzlement, and conspiracy involving Colonel Marcus Halloway, Indian agent for San Carlos Reservation. These are serious charges. They will be examined seriously. All testimony given here will be under oath and subject to penalty of perjury. He gestured to Isianzai. Miss Isianzai, please come forward. She stood slowly, Tobias moving to help her, but she waved him off. She would do this on her own. She walked to the witness chair, her limp visible, her bandaged hand catching sunlight. When she sat, every eye in the parade ground was on her. Dawson spoke gently. Miss Isianzai, I understand you speak English. Is that correct? Yes, my mother taught me, before she died. Good. I am going to ask you to tell us what happened to you. Take your time. If you need to stop, we will stop. Do you understand? I understand. Then please, begin. Isianzai took a breath and began to speak. Her English was rough, the grammar imperfect, but the words carried a weight that perfect syntax could never achieve. She described gathering medicine plants near the creek. She described Sergeant Hendry and 3 soldiers riding up, surrounding her, asking questions about water, about springs, about places that were sacred and secret. When she refused to answer, they tied her hands and dragged her behind a horse for 3 miles to the White Sands. They built the frame, they stripped her, and tied her to it in a position that grew more agonizing with each hour. Then Hendry began his work. First, he asked questions. Where were the 7 springs? How did one find them? What markers showed the way? With each refusal to answer, he struck her with a whip. 15 times, she counted. Then he heated an iron in a fire, showed her the letter H glowing red, told her this would mark her as property of Halloway, pressed it into her thigh and held it there while she screamed. The smell of her own flesh burning, the sound of Hendry laughing. Then the pliers. 3 fingernails torn away while Hendry asked the same questions over and over. Tell us, tell us, tell us. And she did not tell, could not tell, because those springs gave water to 300 people, to children who would die of thirst if the white men controlled the water, to elders who had drunk from those springs for 70 years, to her people who had so little left that taking the water would be taking life itself. So she endured. And when they finally left her to die in the sun, she prayed not for rescue, but for strength to die without speaking. When she finished, the parade ground was silent. Even the soldiers who served under Halloway looked shaken. Some of the civilians outside the gates were weeping openly. Dawson's voice was rough when he spoke. Thank you, Miss Isianzai. That took great courage. He turned to Halloway. Colonel, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Halloway stood, his chains rattled. She is lying. Apache always lie. She is savage. She does not understand civilized ways. Dawson gestured to the photograph. Then how do you explain this? Halloway looked at the image, and something in his face crumbled. Could have been accident. Could have been her own people who did it. The letter is H, Colonel, for Halloway. Your initial. Coincidence. Dawson looked at him for a long moment. We will see. He gestured to Tobias. Mr. McAllister, please testify. Tobias stood and walked to the witness chair. He described finding Isianzai on the frame, the condition she was in, the fight with Hendry and the others. He described bringing her to his cabin, treating her wounds, hearing her story about the sacred springs and Halloway's plan to control the water. He spoke of Camp Grant, of the massacre 5 years before, of pulling Nichi from the flames and being marked as a traitor for it. He spoke of trying to live with the guilt of 143 dead, of 5 years in the mountains trying to find peace that would not come. And he spoke of the choice he made when he saw Isianzai hanging in the desert sun, the choice between walking away from suffering and stepping toward it, between protecting his solitude and protecting a life. I am no hero, Congressman. I am a man with too many ghosts. But that day, I decided one more ghost was too many, so I cut her down. And I would make the same choice again. When Tobias finished, Dawson nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Your honesty is noted. Jed testified next, describing the photograph process, confirming that the image was authentic and unaltered. He also testified about Halloway's trading practices. Samuel Brown testified next. At 62, the former Buffalo soldier moved with the careful dignity of a man who had survived wars both foreign and domestic. His dark skin bore scars from battles against Apache, but his testimony was for them. I served under Colonel Halloway in '74, he said, his voice steady. I was ordered to participate in actions against Apache civilians. When I refused, citing military law that forbids harming non-combatants, Halloway had me dishonorably discharged. He called me a traitor to the white race, said no black man should defend red savages. He looked at Isianzai. Miss, I am sorry for what my people and white people both have done to yours, but I testify today because some things are wrong no matter what color a man's skin is. Dr. Elizabeth Brennan testified after him. At 47, the frontier physician had treated more Apache than most Army doctors combined. She carried medical records documenting repeated injuries consistent with torture among Apache brought to Fort Apache for questioning. These injuries, she stated, holding up her ledger, show systematic abuse. Burns, lacerations, broken bones inflicted deliberately. Colonel Halloway signed off on medical expenses for these treatments, which means he knew what was happening. He authorized it. Chief Nana was the last to testify. At 75, the Mimbres Apache leader moved slowly to the witness chair, leaning on a walking stick carved with the symbols of 7 generations. Through Reverend Whitmore's translation, he spoke. I am old. I have seen many winters. I have fought white soldiers and made peace with white soldiers. But Isianzai is keeper of our water. Without her, without those springs, 300 of my people die. She suffered for them. Now I ask, will white man's justice honor her suffering? Or will it be empty words? The parade ground was utterly silent when he finished. The way food meant for Apache rations mysteriously ended up in white trading posts, sold for profit while Apache families went hungry. Nichi testified about life on the reservation, the starvation policy, the way Halloway used hunger as a weapon to force compliance. He testified about his sister's role as keeper, about the importance of the sacred springs, about what it would mean to his people if that water was taken. Reverend Whitmore testified about his years as a missionary, about witnessing Halloway's cruelty, about writing letters to Washington that were ignored until finally he wrote to Dawson directly. And then Lieutenant Henry Ford testified. Ford walked to the witness chair like a man going to his execution. His uniform was wrinkled, and he had not slept. When he spoke, his voice shook. I was assigned to Fort Apache 2 years ago. Within 6 months, I was in debt. Gambling debts, $3,000. Colonel Halloway found out. He offered to pay the debts in exchange for information about anyone investigating him, anyone asking questions, anyone who might be a threat. He looked at Tobias. When Mr. McAllister and Miss Isianzai began gathering evidence, Halloway ordered me to track them, report their movements. I did. I told him when they met with witnesses. I told him when they went to Mr. Cooper's cabin. I told him when they were riding here. Ford's voice broke. I am responsible for the ambush that nearly killed them all. I did it because I was afraid and weak, and I put my debts ahead of other people's lives. I have no excuse. I deserve whatever punishment comes. Dawson studied him. Why are you testifying now? Because last night in the stockade, I had time to think about what I had done, and I realized that some debts cannot be paid with money. Some debts require truth. So here is the truth. Colonel Halloway tortured Miss Isianzai. He ordered it, he approved it, and he would do it again to anyone who stood between him and what he wanted. The silence that followed was profound. Then Halloway lunged to his feet, chains rattling. You know nothing. That Apache woman, her people killed my family, killed my wife, killed my son. I have the right to revenge. Dawson held up a hand. Sit down, Colonel. But Halloway was beyond listening. They killed them 20 years ago. They deserve everything I did to them. Everything. Congressman Dawson reached into a folder and removed a document. His voice cut through Halloway's shouting like a knife. "Colonel, sit down!" Something in the tone made Halloway stop. He sat, breathing hard, his face purple with rage. Dawson held up the document. "This is a deposition from John McCarthy, taken on his deathbed 3 weeks ago in Santa Fe. Mr. McCarthy was part of a militia group in 1856. He has confessed to a crime that I believe is relevant to these proceedings." He began to read. "On June 15th, 1856, I and 4 other men were paid by land speculators to attack a settler's wagon. We were ordered to dress as Apache to make the attack look like an Indian raid. The goal was to inflame sentiment against the Apache and give the government reason to seize Apache land." Dawson continued, "The wagon we attacked belonged to Marcus Halloway. We killed his wife Sarah and his 6-year-old son James. We made it look like Apache work. Mr. Halloway believed Apache were responsible. He has believed it for 20 years. But it was a lie. White men killed his family. White men dressed as Apache. All to steal land." Halloway sat frozen, his face gone white. "What did you say?" "Your family was killed by white men pretending to be Apache. It was a conspiracy to start a war. You have been avenging yourself on the wrong people for 20 years. The words seemed to break something in Halloway. He slumped forward, chains rattling, and a sound came out of him that was not quite human. A keening wail, grief and rage and realization all mixed together. "Sarah, James, oh God, what have I done?" The hearing paused while Halloway was taken back to the stockade. The man who left was not the arrogant Indian agent who had entered. He was something hollowed out, a shell that had just learned its entire life was built on a lie. When proceedings resumed an hour later, Dawson called Ishianzai back to the witness chair. The crowd had grown larger. Word was spreading through the territory. Something unprecedented was happening at Fort Apache. "Miss Ishianzai," Dawson said, "you have heard Colonel Halloway's confession. You have heard about his family. Does this change your testimony in any way?" "No. What he did to me is still what he did. His pain does not erase mine." "Fair enough," Dawson leaned forward. "Under territorial law, Colonel Halloway could face execution for what he has done. Torture of a civilian is a capital crime. Do you understand this?" "I understand. As the victim, your testimony will carry significant weight in sentencing. What do you believe should happen to Colonel Halloway?" The parade ground went still. Every person there leaned forward, waiting for her answer. Would she choose vengeance or mercy? Would she demand the noose or something else? Isianzai was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but carried to every corner of the fort. "In my people's way, we believe in Ndedu Nakejhini Lada. My people do not seek endless revenge. We seek balance." She gestured to Halloway's empty chair. "This man hurt me, burned me, took my fingernails, made me want to die. But he did this because he was lied to, because white men killed his family and blamed my people. He is victim too. Different kind of victim, but victim. If we kill him, the circle continues. His friends want revenge. Then Apache want revenge for that revenge. Never stops, never ends. Just more blood, more pain, more children crying." She looked directly at Dawson. "I want him to live. Live with truth. Every morning wake up and remember his family died because of white men lies, not Apache actions. Every night sleep knowing he tortured innocent woman for crime she did not commit. And I want him to work. Build schools for Apache children. Dig wells for Apache water. Teach white children that Apache are human beings with souls and families and pain. 25 years of this, maybe more. Not death, life. Life spent making small repairs to the world he broke." When she finished, the silence was absolute. Then slowly one person began to clap. Then another, then a dozen, then 100. The sound built and built until it filled the parade ground and spilled over the fort walls into the desert beyond. Even some of Halloway's own men were clapping. Even some of the soldiers who had stood guard while torture happened were applauding the courage it took to choose mercy over vengeance. Dawson let the applause continue for a moment, then raised his hand for silence. "Miss Isianzai, that is one of the most remarkable statements I have heard in 20 years of public service. Your wisdom honors not just your people, but all people." He turned to the judges. Gentlemen, have you heard enough to make a recommendation? The judges conferred quietly. Then the senior one stood. We have, Congressman. Based on the testimony heard today, we recommend that Colonel Marcus Halloway be stripped of his commission and sentenced to 25 years hard labor, with terms as specified by Ms. Isianzai. Furthermore, we recommend a full audit of the Indian Affairs Office and criminal charges against any officials found to have enabled or concealed Halloway's actions. We also recommend that the sacred springs of the Apache be permanently protected under federal law and that Ms. Isianzai be recognized as the official guardian with full authority to prevent any development or interference with those water sources. Dawson nodded. So ordered. This hearing is concluded. He banged a gavel on the table. Let the record show that justice, though delayed, has been served. They brought Halloway out for sentencing. The man who shuffled into the sunlight bore little resemblance to the colonel who had terrorized the reservation. He looked 20 years older, bent and broken. When he saw Isianzai, he fell to his knees. The guards moved to pull him up, but Dawson waved them back. Let him speak. Halloway crawled forward until he was at Isianzai's feet. I do not deserve your mercy. I tortured you. I tried to take everything from your people. And it was all for nothing, all because I believed a lie. Tears ran down his face into his beard. My wife, my son, they died for nothing. And I made you suffer for nothing. I cannot undo it, cannot make it right. But I swear on Sarah and James's graves I will spend the rest of my life trying. Isianzai looked down at him. You cannot undo past, but you can build future. That is what I ask. Not death, not revenge, just work, hard work, good work, for my people and yours. Halloway nodded, still weeping. I will. I swear it. The guards led him away to begin his sentence. As he passed Tobias, the two men's eyes met. In that moment, an understanding passed between them. Both had been soldiers. Both had followed orders. Both had learned too late that obedience without conscience was just another word for evil. Tobias nodded once. Halloway returned the nod. Then he was gone. Dawson approached their group as the crowd dispersed. Mr. McAllister, Miss Isianzai, I want you to know that what happened here today will be reported to every newspaper in the territory. The photograph will be published. Your testimony will be read in Congress. This will matter. Tobias shook his head. What matters is that 300 Apache will keep their water. The rest is just words. Words change the world, Mr. McAllister. Never underestimate that. After Dawson left, Captain Garrett approached. You are free to go. All charges dropped. In fact, the Army owes you a debt of gratitude. You exposed corruption we had been unable to prove. We did what had to be done. That is all. Garrett smiled slightly. That is all any of us can do. He looked at Isianzai. Miss, if you ever need assistance, you can reach me here. The Army does not forget its debts. As they prepared to leave the fort, Lieutenant Ford approached. He looked terrible, haunted and exhausted. He stopped 10 feet away as if afraid to come closer. Miss Isianzai, Mr. McAllister, I know I do not deserve to speak to you, but I wanted to say I am sorry. For everything. I was weak and cowardly, and I nearly got you killed. Tobias studied him. You testified. That took courage. Not enough courage. Not nearly enough. Isianzai spoke then. You have long life ahead. Use it better than you used yesterday. Ford nodded, tears in his eyes, and walked away to face his own reckoning. The cabin at the base of Superstition Mountains had changed. Where before it had been one man's refuge, now it was something more. A school of sorts. A place where Apache children came to learn English and reading, while also learning the old ways from Isianzai. A place where white settlers came to trade fairly, learning that Apache were neither savages nor victims, but simply people trying to survive in a hard land. Tobias stood on the porch at sunset, watching as the last students left for the day. Inside, Isianzai was cleaning up, putting away slates and primers. Her wounds had healed, though she would carry the scars forever. But she moved without pain now, and her laughter, which had been absent in those first weeks, had returned. She came out to join him on the porch, 2 cups of kioi in her hands. They sat in companionable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to red to purple. You think about him? She asked. Halloway, sometimes. Tobias sipped his coffee. He is building a school near San Carlos, his third one. Works from dawn to dusk, they say. Barely speaks, just works. Good. Work is healing for him and for people he hurt. What about you? Have you healed? She considered the question. My body healed. My spirit, it takes longer. But I think yes, healing happens, little by little. They were quiet again. Then she said, Nichi came by yesterday, while you were hunting. He says you should marry me. Tobias nearly choked on his coffee. What did you tell him? That white man marriage and Apache marriage are different things, that we live as we choose, not as others expect. And how do we choose? She smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her since the desert. We choose this. You in your cabin, me in my dwelling, teaching together, living near, being what we are to each other, whatever that is. That works for me. Good, because I am not moving. This mountain is mine now, too. In the distance, they could see old Jed riding up the trail. At 72, the old trapper had decided he had one more adventure left in him. He had sold his cabin and moved closer, setting up a new place near the school where he could help teach tracking and trapping and the old ways of surviving in the desert. Nichi appeared from the other direction, returning from patrol. He and several other young warriors had taken it upon themselves to protect the school, to make sure no one interfered with the delicate peace they had built. As the sun set completely and stars began to appear, Tobias thought about the question Isianzai had asked him that first night. Why do you help? He understood now that he had answered wrong. It was not about guilt or ghosts or trying to balance some cosmic ledger. It was simpler than that. You helped because you could, because someone needed help and you were there. Because the alternative was walking away, and walking away was a kind of dying. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and pine. Somewhere out there, Halloway was laying bricks for a school that would teach Apache children their letters. Somewhere, Apache families were drawing water from 7 sacred springs that no one would ever take from them again. Somewhere, seeds were growing that had been planted by people who chose mercy over vengeance. It was not enough. It would never be enough. Too many had died. Too much had been lost. The weight of history could not be lifted by one photograph, one hearing, one woman's courage to forgive. But it was something, and sometimes something was enough to build on. You are quiet, Isianzai said. What are you thinking about? The future. What comes next? And what comes next? More teaching, more building, more trying to be better than yesterday. That is good answer. She stood and stretched. I am tired. Teaching children is harder than keeping sacred springs secret. They are your springs. Did you ever tell anyone where they really are? She smiled mysteriously. Nichi knows. Chief Nana knows. That is enough. What about me? You? You do not need to know. You just need to make sure no one asks again. Fair enough. She went inside, leaving him alone with the stars and the desert and the quiet knowledge that he had finally found something worth more than solitude, worth more than safety, worth more than peace, purpose. That night, Tobias slept without dreams of Camp Grant for the first time in 5 years. When he woke to morning light filtering through the pines, Isianzai was already up, starting a fire, preparing to teach another day of children who were learning to live in 2 worlds without losing either one. He rose and joined her, and together they began the work that would fill the rest of their days. Not saving the world, just tending to their small corner of it. Teaching, building, healing, making sure that the suffering of the past was not repeated in the future. It was enough. It would have to be enough. And on a morning when the desert wind blew cool and clear, when children's voices rose in both Apache and English, when justice had bent slightly toward mercy, and mercy had proven stronger than revenge, it was more than enough. It was hope. The schoolhouse that Tobias and Isianzai built stood strong in 1891, larger now, with a second building added for older students. The original cabin had been expanded into living quarters for both of them, separate rooms but shared space. The compromise they had reached between 2 cultures that did not quite understand each other but had learned to respect the distance. Tobias was 60 now, his hair completely white, his movements slower but still sure. He sat on the porch carving a whistle for one of the younger students, while Isianzai worked in the garden, her hair streaked with the gray, her hands still quick despite the scars that would never fade. A rider approached from the east. Even at this distance, Tobias recognized the uniform. Army, but not hostile. Not anymore. The rider dismounted, and Tobias was surprised to see Captain Garrett, now Colonel Garrett, though the years had added silver to his temples and lines around his eyes. "Colonel, what brings you to our humble school?" Garrett smiled. "Respect, mostly, and news." He looked at Eisen's who had come to join them. "The Congressional Committee has made their decision. The sacred springs are officially protected under federal law. Permanent protection, no development, no interference. Ever." Isianzai nodded slowly. "This is good, but it should have been ours to begin with. Not gift from government, just recognition of what always was." "You are right, but sometimes the law takes time to catch up with what is right." "What of Halloway?" Tobias asked. "Still alive, still working. He has built 7 schools now, dug 43 wells, taught hundreds of children. He asked me to give you this." Garrett handed over a letter. Tobias opened it and read silently. When he finished, he passed it to Isianzai. The letter was simple. "I cannot undo what I did. But every school I build, every well I dig, I remember that you gave me the chance to do it. You gave me life when I deserved death. I will never forget. And I will never stop trying to be worthy of that gift." Isianzai folded the letter carefully. He understands now. That is good. After Garrett left, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over the Superstition Mountains. Students had gone home. The desert was quiet except for the wind. "Do you regret it?" Tobias asked. "Showing mercy instead of demanding justice?" She thought about it. No, justice would have been his death. But Mercy built 7 schools. Mercy dug 43 wells. Mercy taught him, and everyone who watches him, that change is possible. Even for worse people. Even when it seems too late. "You are wiser than I am." "No, just Apache. We understand cycles. Revenge is cycle that never ends. Mercy is cycle that breaks. We chose to break." They sat in silence as stars began to appear. Young Timothy, Samuel Brown's grandson, now 15 years old, came running up the path. "Grandfather Tobias, I tracked a deer all the way to the North Ridge, just like you taught me." Tobias smiled. "Did you take the shot?" "No, she had a fawn with her. Seemed wrong. That is because you are learning. Hunting is not just about killing. It is about knowing when not to kill." The boy grinned and ran off to tell the others about his tracking success. Isianzai watched him go. "That boy has good heart, like his grandfather. Like you. I am not his grandfather. You are grandfather to all these children. You and me both. We teach them. We raise them. That makes us family." Tobias considered this. "I suppose it does." The last light faded from the sky. Inside the schoolhouse, the lamps were lit for evening lessons. Adults would come tonight, Apache and white alike, learning to read, learning each other's languages, learning that the divisions between people were not as great as they had been taught. Nichi appeared from the darkness, no longer young and hot-tempered, now a man of 36 with wife and 2 children, a respected voice in the councils of his people. "Sister, Tobias, I have news. The government is offering land grants to Apache families who want to start farms. Real ownership, legal title." Isianzai looked at her brother. "And you trust this?" Nichi shrugged. Well, I shrugged. "I trust that we won this time. That what you did, what he did, made difference. So yes, I trust enough to try." After Nichi left, Isianzai turned to Tobias. "We did good thing." "Yes?" "Yes, we did good thing, then I have no regrets." Her hand found his in the darkness. "No regrets at all." They sat together as the desert wind blew cool and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon. 2 people from different worlds who had found common ground in the simple work of teaching and building and healing. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole in the way that mattered. The story that had begun with torture and vengeance had ended with schools and wells and children who knew both Apache and English. It had ended with mercy proving stronger than hatred, with one woman's courage to forgive teaching an entire territory that another way was possible. On Tobias's desk inside the cabin, there was a photograph, not the one of torture, though that image had traveled to Washington and changed laws. No, this was a different photograph. Jed had taken it 5 years ago, before he died peacefully in his sleep at 77, having lived just long enough to see the school thriving. The photograph showed Tobias and Isianzai standing in front of the schoolhouse, surrounded by 30 children, Apache and white, all looking at the camera with the solemn intensity of those being memorialized. But if you look at closely, you could see with smiles trying to break through. You could see hope. That photograph sat on Tobias's desk as a reminder, not of what had been survived, but of what had been built. And every morning when he woke, he looked at it and remembered that the choice to help one woman on a torture frame had led to this, to children learning, to people's healing, to a future that was not perfect but was possible. It was enough. And on a cool autumn night in 1891, with the woman he had saved and who had in turn saved him sitting beside him under a sky full of stars, Tobias McAllister finally understood what Jed had tried to teach him all those years ago. You could not save everyone, but that did not mean you stopped trying to save anyone. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, saving one person was enough to change the world, or at least one small corner of it, which was enough. It was always enough. On a spring morning in 1902, Tobias Graybear McAllister passed quietly in his sleep at age 70. Isianzai found him on the porch, his hand still holding the whistle he had been carving for a student. He looked peaceful, she told Nichi later, like a man who had finally made peace with his ghosts. They buried him on the ridge above the school, facing east toward the sunrise. Apache and white settlers came from 100 miles to pay respects. Even Colonel Garrett, now retired, made the journey. Isianzai lived 13 more years, teaching until her hands could no longer hold chalk. When she died in 1915 at 58, they buried her beside Tobias. The marker read simply, Tobias McAllister, 1832, 1902. He saved one, then 300. Isianzai, 1857, 1915. She who kept the oath. Between the two graves, someone had planted a seedling. By 1920, it had grown into a ponderosa pine that students would sit under to read. By 1940, its shade covered both graves completely. The tree still stands today,